She had just given the biggest audition of her life, a TV series that could change everything. Her family believed she was on the path to stardom, but days later, Shannon Madill was gone. Her car was still parked outside. Her phone was inside the house. Her wallet, her keys, everything she owned was right where she left it. And for 7 months, her husband stood next to her family at press conferences, crying and begging for answers. But there was a problem. He already knew where she was. Shannon Heather Madill was born on July 9, 1989, in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. She grew up in a close-knit family, alongside her sister Erin and her brothers Tyler and Brett. Her parents, David and Lisa Madill, raised their children in a loving household where laughter was always welcome. And Shannon, she was the kind of person who made everyone laugh. Friends and family described her as a natural performer. They said her best friends were a spotlight and a microphone. From a young age, Shannon knew what she wanted to do with her life. She wanted to be on stage. She wanted to make people smile. She wanted to be an actress and a comedian, and she worked hard every single day to make that dream come true. Growing up, Shannon was always the center of attention in the best way possible. She had this quirky, offbeat energy that drew people in. She wasn't afraid to be herself. She wasn't afraid to be different, and that's what made people love her so much. Her family described her as fearless. She lived life to the fullest, and she showed everyone around her how to do the same. Shannon performed at the Calgary Fringe Festival. She did stand-up comedy. She appeared in short films. One of her most notable projects was a film called My Life is a Musical in 2013. She also appeared in films like Scared Stiff and Ascension in 2014. She was building her resume. She was making connections. She was doing everything she could to break into the industry. And it was working. People were starting to notice her. But Shannon's personal life was more complicated than it appeared on the surface. In 2010, she met a man named Joshua Burgess through mutual friends. Joshua was immediately attracted to Shannon's lively personality. They started dating, and for years, things seemed to be going well. After 4 years together, Shannon and Joshua got married in early 2014. The Madill family welcomed Joshua with open arms. They treated him like one of their own. They trusted him completely. But behind closed doors, the marriage was far from perfect. And by late 2014, things had started to fall apart in ways that nobody could have predicted. What happened next would shock everyone who knew them. And it would reveal just how little anyone truly knew about what was going on inside that house on Spiller Road. Let me take you back to November 2014. Shannon was 25 years old. Her acting career was picking up steam. She had just landed what her family described as the biggest audition of her acting career. It was for a role in a new television series. This could have been her big break, the one that changed everything. And Shannon was excited. She was hopeful. She believed that her dreams were finally within reach. On the evening of November 26, 2014, Shannon went to her audition. That audition was recorded on video. Later, that footage would become one of the most heartbreaking pieces of evidence in this case, because those were some of the last images of Shannon alive. After the audition, Shannon met up with her sister Erin. They spent some time together. Everything seemed normal. Shannon was in good spirits. She was looking forward to the future. At some point that night, Shannon returned to the home she shared with Joshua in the 1900 block of Spiller Road Southeast in Calgary. This was a house in the Ramsey neighborhood, and this is where everything changed. Now, here's what we know about what was happening in Shannon and Joshua's relationship at this time. By November 2014, their marriage was essentially over. They had separated and were both dating other people. In fact, they had what Joshua would later describe as an open marriage. Shannon was seeing another man named Ian Wallace. Joshua was seeing other women as well. But here's where things get complicated. Just a few weeks before Shannon disappeared, she had told Joshua that she wanted to close their marriage. She wanted to end the open arrangement. She wanted to focus on their relationship. But Joshua didn't want that. He wanted to keep dating other people. And according to reports, he continued to see another woman despite Shannon's wishes. This caused major tension between them. They argued about it, and that argument would become very important later. There's another thing you need to know. Shannon was planning to leave. She had a job offer in Edmonton. She was packing up her things. She was preparing to move on with her life. She was ready to start fresh. And this was something that Joshua was very much aware of. Now, on November 30th, 2014, Shannon was supposed to meet her brother for a family dinner. She didn't show up. At first, nobody panicked. Shannon was known for being a bit unpredictable. She sometimes traveled last minute for comedy gigs or auditions. Her family thought maybe she had taken off for an acting opportunity. Joshua even told them that Shannon had booked a role 200 miles away and had driven there with a friend. But when days passed and nobody heard from Shannon, her family started to worry. Her sister Erin became particularly concerned. Something just didn't feel right. On December 1st, 2014, Shannon was officially reported missing, and that's when the nightmare truly began. When police arrived at the house on Spiller Road, they found something strange. Shannon's car was parked outside. Her phone was inside the house. Her wallet was there. Her keys, all of her belongings. Everything she would need if she had left town was still right there. But Shannon herself was nowhere to be found. It didn't make sense. How could she have gone to an audition 200 miles away without her car, without her phone, without her wallet? Joshua told police that he wasn't concerned. He said Shannon often traveled for auditions and sometimes left on short notice. He downplayed the situation. He acted like this was normal. But for Shannon's family, nothing about this was normal. And the more they thought about it, the more suspicious they became. The Calgary Police Service launched an investigation. They checked Shannon's cell phone records. They looked at her medical records, her banking records. They searched for any trace of her. But all leads came up empty. There was no activity on her bank accounts, no credit card transactions, no cell phone calls. It was as if Shannon had simply vanished into thin air. Days after Shannon was reported missing, something strange happened. The family stood together at a press conference at Calgary Police Headquarters. They pleaded for help in finding Shannon. They spoke directly to her, hoping she might see the broadcast. Her sister Erin held up a photo of Shannon and said, through tears, "Shannon, if you see this, please, you're not in trouble. We all love you and miss you so much. We don't need to know where you are. We just want to know that you're safe." And standing right there next to them, looking just as worried and heartbroken as everyone else, was Joshua Burgess. He stood with his wife's family. He pretended to grieve alongside them. He acted like a concerned husband who desperately wanted to find his missing wife, and nobody suspected a thing. But as the investigation continued, detectives started to notice some red flags. Joshua's story wasn't adding up. His memory of the night Shannon disappeared was fuzzy. He couldn't remember important details, and some of the things he said just didn't make sense. Here's one of the biggest red flags. 4 days into the search, Joshua suddenly found Shannon's phone. He said he discovered it in a pair of her pants at the house. Now think about that for a second. Her phone had been ringing non-stop. Family and friends were calling and texting constantly, trying to reach her. The phone was supposedly right there in the house the whole time, and yet Joshua only found it 4 days later? That seemed suspicious, but it gets even more suspicious. Police looked at Shannon's cell phone records, and they discovered something disturbing. On November 28th, the day after Shannon was last seen alive, her phone had moved. It went from inside the house to the alley behind their residence, and then back again. Detective Christina Witt noticed this right away. She later said her phone had done a walkabout in the alley behind their residence. But who was with this phone? Was it Shannon? This was a major clue. If Shannon was alive and had left on her own, why would her phone only move to the alley and back? It was as if someone was trying to make it look like she had left. Someone was staging evidence. Someone was trying to create a false trail. And the most obvious suspect was the person who had access to that phone. The person who was living in that house, Joshua Burgess. But the police didn't have enough evidence to make an arrest. Not yet. And so the months dragged on. Winter turned to spring. Spring turned to summer. And Shannon Madill was still missing. Her family held on to hope. But with each passing day, that hope faded a little more. They feared the worst. They couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened to Shannon. and they couldn't shake the feeling that Joshua knew more than he was saying. Meanwhile, Joshua was living his life. And here's something that shocked a lot of people when it came out later. While his wife was missing, while her family was desperately searching for her, while the whole city of Calgary was wondering what had happened to this young actress, Joshua Burgess was on a dating website. That's right, he had an active profile on OkCupid. His username was JustJoshingUEH. According to a staff member at a local business, Joshua was seen bringing different women around. He would hold hands with them. He would kiss them in public. He was acting like a single man. He was acting like his wife hadn't vanished under mysterious circumstances just months earlier. This was incredibly suspicious, and it would later become a key piece of evidence in the case against him. For 7 long months, the investigation continued. The Madill family waited for answers. They went through every possible scenario in their minds. Maybe Shannon was still alive somewhere. Maybe she had run away. Maybe she had started a new life. They tried to hold on to hope, but deep down, they knew something was very wrong. Detective Christina Witt never stopped working the case. She kept looking for evidence. She kept building a case against Joshua Burgess. And by the summer of 2015, she had enough to get a search warrant. On July 8, 2015, more than 7 months after Shannon disappeared, police arrived at the house on Spiller Road. They had a warrant to search the cars and to examine Shannon's cell phone. This was the moment of truth. Detective Witt knocked on the door. She knocked again. No answer, but they could hear movement inside. Someone was home. They knew Joshua was in there. What happened next was bizarre. Joshua wouldn't come to the door. He spoke through the window, saying he would be out soon, but he kept stalling. He delayed and delayed. Detective Witt decided to call his phone from outside the house, and that phone call would change everything. Within the first 10 minutes of their conversation, Joshua became very emotional. He started crying, and then, suddenly, he blurted out the words that Detective Witt had been waiting to hear. "I killed my wife," just like that, after 7 months of lies. After 7 months of pretending to grieve, after 7 months of watching Shannon's family suffer while knowing exactly where she was, Joshua finally confessed. He admitted that he had killed Shannon. He admitted that he had hidden her body, and he told police exactly where to find her. But the confession didn't come without drama. After admitting what he had done, Joshua didn't come out of the house for hours. Police negotiated with him. They tried to get him to surrender peacefully. When he finally emerged, they discovered something horrifying. He was covered in blood. He had tried to slit his own throat. He had attempted suicide. Joshua was rushed to the hospital. He survived. And once he was stable, he was taken into police custody. The next day, he sat down with investigators and gave a full confession. He provided a step-by-step account of what he had done to Shannon, and the details were devastating. According to Joshua's confession, here's what happened on the night of November 27th, 2014. Shannon came home from her audition and from spending time with her sister. It was late, the early hours of the morning. Joshua was also home. They were both on the couch. They talked. And then, despite all the problems in their relationship, despite the fact that they were essentially separated, they became intimate. But here's where Joshua's account takes a dark turn. He claimed that what he thought was make-up sex, Shannon saw as break-up sex. After they were intimate, Shannon told Joshua something that he couldn't handle. She told him that she regretted marrying him. She told him that she didn't need him anymore. She told him that she was disgusted by his touch. She insulted him. She made it clear that their relationship was over. And that's when Joshua snapped. He said he just wanted her to stop talking. He put his hand over her mouth. Shannon bit his hand. And then, in a fit of rage, Joshua strangled his wife, first with his hands. Then, when that wasn't enough, he removed his belt and used it to finish the job. He choked the life out of Shannon Madill on their living room couch. And then, he hid her body. What Joshua did after killing Shannon is almost as disturbing as the murder itself. Instead of calling for help, instead of admitting what he had done, he made a calculated decision to hide the crime. And he spent the next 7 months pretending that nothing had happened. After strangling Shannon, Joshua placed her body in a large Rubbermaid container. He moved her to the back porch of their house. This was late November in Calgary. Winter was coming. The temperatures dropped below freezing, and Shannon's body, sealed in that plastic container, sat on the porch through the winter months. Think about that for a moment. While Shannon's family was making tearful pleas on television, while police were searching for any sign of her, while the entire city was wondering what had happened to this young actress, her body was right there, frozen, hidden in plain sight on the back porch of the house she had shared with her killer. Cadaver dogs were eventually brought to the property. They hit on 3 different locations: the retaining wall at the front of the house, 2 shovels leaning against the house, and the rear porch. The dogs knew something was wrong. They could sense death, but at the time, there wasn't enough evidence to dig deeper. When spring came and the ground thawed, Joshua knew he had to move the body. He couldn't keep her on the porch forever. Someone might find her. So he dug a shallow grave in the front yard of their home. He buried Shannon there, covering her with dirt, branches, and concrete slabs. And then he went back to living his life, dating other women, going to work, pretending to be a grieving husband whenever anyone asked about his missing wife. When police executed the search warrant in July 2015, they found Shannon exactly where Joshua said she would be, buried in the front yard of the house on Spiller Road, the place she had called home, the place where she had dreamed about her future, the place where her husband had killed her and then buried her like she was nothing. In his confession, Joshua said something that was particularly chilling. When asked why he buried Shannon in his own yard, he replied, "I chose my lawn because I just didn't want her to leave. Even in death, he wanted to control her. Even after taking her life, he couldn't let her go." And that statement reveals so much about the mindset of a killer. This wasn't just a crime of passion. This was a crime of control. This was a man who couldn't accept that his wife was leaving him. A man who killed her rather than let her walk away, and then kept her close, even after she was gone. Joshua Burgess was charged with second-degree murder in connection with the death of Shannon Madill. At first, he pleaded not guilty. He was going to fight the charges. He was going to make Shannon's family relive the horror of what happened in a public trial. For more than 2 years, the case dragged through the legal system. Shannon's family waited. They prepared themselves for a trial that would force them to hear every detail of how their daughter and sister had been killed. They wrote victim impact statements. They steeled themselves for the worst. Joshua's trial was scheduled to begin in December 2017. The family arrived at the courthouse ready to face him, ready to finally get justice for Shannon. But then something unexpected happened. On December 4th, 2017, the day his trial was supposed to begin, Joshua Burgess changed his plea. He admitted his guilt. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The trial was over before it even started. In many ways, this was a relief for Shannon's family. They wouldn't have to sit through weeks of testimony. They wouldn't have to hear every brutal detail described in open court. The guilty plea spared them that trauma. But it also meant that some questions would never be fully answered. Some details would remain hidden, and the full truth of what happened that night might never be known. During the sentencing hearing, Shannon's family finally got their chance to speak. They had waited years for this moment, and their words were powerful. Her sister Erin addressed Joshua directly. She said, "You kept us suffering for so long, intentionally keeping us in limbo. I've lost myself. I lost my lifelong best friend." The pain in her words was clear. For 7 months, she had searched for her sister. For 7 months, she had hoped that Shannon might still be alive. And the whole time, Joshua knew exactly where Shannon was. He watched them suffer and said nothing. Her brother Tyler also spoke. He looked Joshua in the eyes and said, "The ability to look a person in the eyes, knowing you're the cause of all the pain and suffering that you see, and act like you know nothing." Tyler couldn't understand how someone could be so cold, how someone could stand next to a grieving family and pretend to share their pain, knowing that he was the one who caused it. Her father David expressed feelings of deep betrayal. He said, "I feel a significant amount of betrayal. Josh was not some stranger on the street, but rather someone we had welcomed into the family. The Madills had trusted Joshua. They had treated him like a son, and he had taken their daughter from them in the most brutal way imaginable. Her mother, Lisa, spoke about the hole in her heart that would never heal. She talked about how the family no longer decorates for Christmas. Shannon loved the holidays. She loved eggnog. She loved the joy and warmth of the season. But now, without her, the celebrations felt hollow. "It doesn't feel right to decorate the house without her," Lisa said. Before his sentencing, Joshua was given a chance to speak. He read a written apology to Shannon's family. He said, "I'm very sorry for the vows that I made, that I promised to look after her. No matter what the circumstances were, I failed her in that. For several months afterwards, everybody stood by me, unquestionably. I failed all of you in that, and I am so very sorry for that, and so very sorry that I didn't say something earlier." For many people, those words rang hollow. It was hard to accept an apology from someone who had lied for 7 months, someone who had watched a family suffer and did nothing, someone who had killed his wife because he didn't like what she was saying. "I just wanted her to stop talking." That was his reason. That was his excuse for taking a life. Joshua Burgess was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for at least 10 years. Under Canadian law, this was the standard sentence for second-degree murder. He would spend at least a decade behind bars before he could even apply for release. But for Shannon's family, no amount of time would ever be enough. The most haunting part of this entire case is not the murder itself. It's not even the 7 months of deception that followed. It's the moment when we realize just how close Joshua came to getting away with it. Think about it. If the police hadn't obtained that search warrant in July 2015, who knows how long the truth might have stayed buried. Literally buried. Right there in the front yard of the house on Spiller Road. Joshua had fooled everyone. He had stood next to Shannon's family at press conferences. He had looked into the eyes of her mother, her father, her sister, her brothers. He had watched them cry. He had watched them beg for information, and he had said nothing. He had pretended to be just as confused and worried as they were. He had played the role of the grieving husband perfectly. And all the while, Shannon's body was right there. First on the back porch, frozen in a plastic container. Then, in the front yard, buried under dirt and branches and concrete. She was never far from him. She never left the property, and he kept her there on purpose, because even in death, he couldn't let her go. The phone records were what really gave him away. That one clue, the fact that Shannon's phone had moved to the alley and back on November 28th. It didn't make sense for a woman who had supposedly left town for an audition. It made perfect sense for a man who was trying to stage a crime scene. Someone walked that phone into the alley, probably hoping to make it look like Shannon had left, but they didn't go far enough. The movement was too short, too suspicious, and Detective Christina Witt noticed. When she confronted Joshua with a search warrant, he broke almost immediately. Within 10 minutes, he was crying and confessing. 7 months of lies, 7 months of deception, and it all came crashing down in a single phone call. The reason this case is so disturbing is because of how easily it could have gone differently. If Joshua had been more careful, if he had been better at covering his tracks, if he had been able to control his emotions when the police showed up, Shannon might still be missing today. Her body might still be in that yard, and her family might still be wondering what happened to her. That's the reality of cases like this. The killer lives among us. The killer pretends to be normal. The killer shows up at press conferences and cries for the cameras. And sometimes, the killer gets away with it. We don't like to think about that. We want to believe that justice always wins, that the truth always comes out. But the truth is that some killers are never caught, some victims are never found, and some families never get the closure they deserve. Shannon's family was lucky in one terrible sense. They got answers. They know what happened. They know where Shannon is. They got to bury her properly. They got to say goodbye, and they got to see her killer go to prison. Not every family gets that, and it's important to remember just how easily things could have gone the other way. Subscribe for more stories like this one,